Okay, the broadcast is moving. Let me turn off that fan. The channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I am Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we are talking about the short lived Dreamworks 2D animation studio. It only made a total of 5 films um, in a transition period where the entire movie industry was kind of in its last gasps of 2D animation before switching over almost entirely to 3D. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but mostly we're going to talk about the actual movies they made. Um, we're skipping the one that was direct to video. But so that's the quick elevator pitch for the concept of the episode. Do you want? Should we talk maybe just a quick summary of like the history that we're talking about here before we dive into the movies? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we should talk through the history a little bit about what happened. And I have a confession to make. I forgot we were watching more than just the two core, like
Oh,
primary.
okay.
I
You
think we'll be okay, though.
you
I mean, I
didn't
think
watch Spirit or Sinbad?
I have seen both of them, so I can
Okay.
offer some commentary on them. So that
All
I
right.
have, but I did not rewatch them. I,
Okay.
which I just realized right now is completely just again, this is a product of a time of year for me that's very busy, and I just was like, oh yeah, we're watching these two movies, watched
hmm
them.
Well, I think certainly Prince of Egypt and Road to El Dorado are the ones that I think are the best two of the four. But yeah, so we'll touch on the other two, but probably we'll focus the discussion then on those first
Which
two.
honestly we probably would have anyway. So I think
Yeah.
that's why I didn't. When I realized that I hadn't done that, I didn't pull the eject on this episode
Mm.
because I think we will still cover the concept in full.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
You brought this up, so why don't
sure,
you
sure.
give
So
your
let us rewind the clock all the way back to the year 1998, when, first of all, let me certainly clarify that I'm getting a lot of this from like Wikipedia and stuff. But the basic idea here is that DreamWorks as a studio was created, of course, by Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and David Geffen. So DreamWorks SKG and that whole, so DreamWorks is a much bigger studio that also makes lots of live action movies and everything, but they had DreamWorks Animation, and one of the so it says, to build the talent base, Spielberg brought over artists from his London-based studio, Amblimation, and Katzenberg recruited some of the top staff from Disney, and they all kind of, some of them came from other studios as well, but it all kind of was brought together to make they were looking to make all kinds of movies, not only 2D. And so 1998 featured 2 releases from them. One was Ants with a Z, one of those where it came out the same year as A Bug's Life in those crazy little bits of serendipity that happen sometimes. But they also released Prince of Egypt, which we're going to talk more about, but is mostly hand drawn 2D animation, but also features some elements done with computer, animated in 3D, but then implemented into the 2D animation. And so those kind of went well, and or relatively well, and they were kind of moving forward. And they started. They next brought in Aardman and released Chicken Run, which had been partly in production already, but they brought it into their fold to get it finished and then distributed. And so for a little while there, DreamWorks Animation was doing kind of all 3 modes. The computer animation, the 2D animation, and stop motion. But that sort of dream of doing all these different kinds did not last very long, because in 2001, Shrek came out and made a ridiculous amount of money. And everyone was starting to say, hmm, maybe maybe that's what people want. And so even though they had two more, Road to El Dorado came out in 2000, but when 2001 came out and just blew everyone away, it went on to win the first Oscar for Best Animated Feature Film when the year they introduced that category. And so that was the death knell all by itself. So they had two other movies that were already in production, Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, and Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas. So they went ahead and finished those and released them, but they had already decided that they weren't going to make any more, that the future was computer. And so that is the short-lived story of DreamWorks' 2D animation division. And I feel like they made four good movies. We were just talking about, I think those first two are better than the last two, but I feel like they're all reasonably good movies. I wouldn't say any of the four are bad. I think Spirit and Sinbad are perhaps more forgettable, and Sinbad had the extremely unfortunate luck to come out within, I think, 1 week of Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. So, yeah, that was just unfortunate timing for that movie to get totally, it's almost a little bit like what Shrek did to the rest of 2D animation. Is just all of a sudden people were much more excited by this other sort of pirate property, and the perceived lesser one didn't last. But so, I mean, that's the high level version of it. But just for me, as someone who's a big fan of 2D animation in that, like the hand drawn style, it's a little bit of a bummer to me that it has pretty much fallen entirely out of like cinematic presentations, at least in the United States, right? Because you still get, you're still getting movies coming out of Japan, other countries. You're still getting it on TV and stuff like that. But I kind of like, I can love and often do computer animated movies, but at the same time, I don't want that to be the only kind that's available. And so I'm kind of protective feeling about 2D animated movies in that way. And so that's what was the inspiration for this.
Yeah, and it was good timing to revisit this also because, this is when Disney's going through and live action ish remaking all of their
Mm-hmm.
2D animations.
Yeah. So,
So, you know, again, we're not here to get into those, but they're, Little Mermaid just came out this year, like this summer,
mm-hmm.
and it it's fine,
I
you know.
wonder if the bloom is off the rose a little bit for those. I mean, they started making those and they were making lots and lots of money. The Beauty and the Beast and Lion King ones in particular made lots and lots of money. And so I think that's why they kind of retooled and started saying, "Okay, we're going to just keep making these." But it always seems to me a little bit like a path of diminishing returns, because you can only remake your best existing stories that many times, and the trick is, the gimmick is going to start wearing off. And I wonder if that's kind of what's happening, because I don't know. I mean, I think Little Mermaid made money, but it's not been talked about very much. Like, its primary controversy was before the release, and then it kind of just turned into nothing. At least my perception.
Yeah, well, and I just anecdotally, in my family, my wife and I have gone to seen all of these, and she really enjoyed those first two,
Mm-hmm.
and they did kind of give, and we've talked about this through the Oscar nomination process and all that type of stuff. But Little Mermaid is her favorite of the old animations, and so she was most excited to go see this based on her good experience with the past two, and left it feeling the same as I just described. Like, I mean, it was okay, but I kind of prefer the other one.
Yeah.
And so now you're losing some of your core fans who were actually on board with this, it's just not, and then you have something like, where you're tapping into the past, like a Barbie movie, that's just absolutely just shattering the cultural norms, right?
Mm.
And it's just so hard to figure this stuff out, right? And
Well,
so,
the Barbie movie, I think, is confounding a lot of metrics in the sense that all of a sudden studios are talking about the success of Barbie and saying, I guess people want to see movies made about toys. When a lot of people are saying, I'm not sure
careful.
that's the lesson. I mean, it's not like you haven't been making movies about toys. But the lesson of this one is that maybe it's because it's good. It's because you got talented people and you gave them a lot of creative freedom, and then they made a good movie, as opposed to the idea that, oh, what other Mattel properties can we turn into movies now?
Well, and they also tapped into a cult, like a cultural phenomenon, and they took something that was so anti that phenomenon and like tied it
Mm-hmm.
in to what's going on now while linking it to the past and still honoring the past. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was just it's super slick, which I'm sure like I'm sure it's going to get nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, there's no
In
question in
some
my mind.
category.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll get something.
So
I
we'll
am
have plenty of
sure.
discussion about that. But
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to drive us down that. I was
Oh,
just
sure. No,
reframing
no,
the
it's
fact
yeah.
that like, we're mining the past for these stories,
Mm-hmm.
and the Disney thing wasn't working and all that. And it's just like, well, maybe some of these things that were in 2D animation can just live in 2D animation. And and I think we hit on a couple here that probably can. And I
Yeah. Well, like it's all just kind of comes down to like just that history of the studios are trying to figure out what kind of movies do people want. And the metric that they have are things like reviews and awards, but mostly what the studios care about is box office, which, from an artistic standpoint is not always what we wish they would prioritize, but it makes sense from a corporation point of view. And so they're trying to figure it out. And so just like DreamWorks is looking out like, well, we put out Prince of Egypt and we put out Road to El Dorado and they do okay. And then we put out Shrek and it does gangbusters. It's like, okay, that's what people want, I guess. So let's just do that. And so that's what they did. But they made good movies in the meantime. So let's talk a little bit about them. Do we want to touch on the latter two first, just because there's going to be less total discussion of them? And I don't think we really have an arc of these four. They were all made within like a 4 to 5 year period. So it's not really like there's.
well, yeah, and I'm sure even just when they were started was probably there was a lot of consecutive work on them and stuff
Mm-hmm.
too. So yeah,
Right. I
no,
just mean that we don't really have a narrative that plays out over the course of the four, other
no,
than just halfway through making the four of them, they decided to not make any more after those were done.
no.
But so Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. So you mentioned you had seen them all, but so like anyone who hasn't seen it, which wouldn't surprise me because it's not like it gets talked about a lot anymore or anything like that. Is a story about a horse who does not talk but occasionally has voiceover narration by Matt Damon. But like the voiceover narration kind of like even the animals talk to each other like real animals do, but occasionally Matt Damon comes in to clarify what it is that Spirit is thinking. He's also never actually like named Spirit in the movie. Like he doesn't ever really have a name, which is kind of funny. Just we talked about a little bit about the title of that one, just because how the Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron is like, what does that even mean? But whatever. So the basic plot is this horse is born. He's growing up with a herd of wild horses in America at around the Civil War period, and he is kind of protective of his herd. But then one day he discovers some mysterious creatures have moved into their territory, and it is, of course, humans. And they say, "Hey, what a beautiful horse!" And they capture him, and so he is, you know, made prisoner by them. They try to break him so that he'll be, you know, a riding horse for them. It is, as I mentioned, Civil War period, and so what we see is like, you know, one of the western outposts of the Union Army, and there's a colonel in particular that really like wants that to be his horse. And then they capture a Native American, and then the Native American and the horse escape together. There's kind of a chase, and that's really it. Like, I mean, plot wise, I guess I overstated the last act is that he does come to like this Native American man for a while, because at first he's just thinking, I've never seen humans at all before. I don't get them. I don't get what the difference is. But then the Native American guy treats him nicer. Also, after trying for a little while to train him to be a riding horse, gives up and says, "I recognize you're never going to do this, and so I'm going to stop trying to force it." And then let him go. And then we get the sort of the chase, and there's a big action sequence with like a train that's being like dragged up a hill, like not on a track. Like they're moving the train from one location to another where they don't have track laid, and it, you know, like comes tumbling down the hill, and that's like a use of CG and stuff like that. But that's the basic plot of this one. So, do you have any particular memories of this one, or?
Not really, other than it. It just kind of it's exactly what you described. Like it's pretty straightforward. It's not super in depth. Like the whole plot is about more about the feeling
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, what it feels like to want to be free, but to be
Mm-hmm.
kind of tied to captivity and routine or whatever. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what I took from it.
One of the things that I took that I thought about watching it this time is that even though it's never explicit in the movie, it's kind of impossible to get away from the parallels of them trying to break him in the way that you break a horse to train them for riding and slavery, especially given that it's literally taking place in the Civil War period. And they never really kind of addressed that. And a lot of the other sort of thematic elements are kind of dealing with, you know, the way that the Native Americans were often treated. But they kind of, you know, perhaps it's smarter for them to not get into it too deeply in what's supposed to be a kid's kind of adventure movie. But it feels a little bit like they kind of flirt with those ideas a little bit more than they should if they're not willing to really engage with them.
Interesting.
I don't, this is not a big complaint. It's more just something I thought about in a way that I probably didn't when I saw it in 2002 or whatever. Um, yeah, but I mean, by and large, it's good. I think it's a strange concept. You know, it's one of those things where if you're going to have animal protagonists, that's certainly not new to cartoons, but usually they get to talk, at least with each other. Like, even if animals don't talk to people, you at least get to have them sort of talk with each other. And so this idea that they're going to try to keep it to, like, you know, even horses when they're trying to commute with, so what they end up having to do is to use elaborate anthropomorphized body language for the horses to, so that they can kind of convey things more complex to one another. You know, lots of expressive eyes and so on. That it's actually, they do a pretty good job, but it also just feels a little bit like they made a lot of work for themselves by deciding that the animals wouldn't be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that part of it too. That sort of like, you know, you have to be in the mood for it because it's all very like there's a feeling that this movie
Hmm.
gives you as opposed to like a discussion, you know.
Yeah. So I feel like I'll maybe just leave it by saying uh, I think it's good. I enjoyed rewatching it. I think people should see it, but maybe not as a high priority compared to other things that are out there. But that said, it is perfectly watchable, and I enjoyed revisiting it. But it was
Cool.
also one that I really hadn't thought about in a long time.
Me
Uh,
either.
yeah, and then we have Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, which is a much more traditional adventure story with a, more or less known character name. Just the idea of Sinbad the sailor is like, obviously, there's a long history of those stories, right? Dating back centuries and in different cultures and so on. And then you got, the full voice cast of, Michelle Pfeiffer and Brad Pitt and Catherine Zeta-Jones in there. And, it's much more in the vein of, of the four, it's almost the most traditional animated adventure movie because whereas Prince of Egypt is played pretty straight, like it's a musical, but it's taking the story very seriously. Road to El Dorado is goofs, goofs, goofs. It's all bits, right? Like very little of that is taken seriously, but to its betterment, in my opinion. And then
Yes.
Spirit is just weird altogether, but thematically fairly straightforward. But then Sinbad is just like, yeah, it's adventure. You've got kind of the roguish pirate captain who's kind of trying to be a thief, but he's pulled in two directions by the secret heart of gold and all that. Um, so for anyone who hasn't watched it recently, I'll say kind of like with Spirit, it's frankly better than I remembered it, and I think it honestly probably just suffered by the close release to Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, and it has maybe it's not the strongest script in the world. It has a lot of pretty just workmanlike dialogue, and extremely quippy, like MCU style, quips, uh, that sort of thing. And it's kind of blasé in that regard. It does not a standout, I guess. I mean, but there's some great imagery. The plot basically is you start with Sinbad, who is leading his crew. We're told. So first we meet the goddess of chaos, who is looking down on the world and ready to start some mischief. And so she's looking down at these two ships approaching each other. Then we see that one of them is Sinbad leading his pirate crew to attack another ship and steal the treasure that it's carrying. But then once he gets on board, he discovers that the treasure is being guarded, escorted by his old best friend from before he became a pirate. And so, old best friend is basically saying, look, man, I'm not entirely judging you for being a pirate, but I can't let you steal this thing. Please, for the sake of our old friendship, just walk away. And they don't get to a full resolution, although it seems like Sinbad is planning to go ahead and take it anyway. And the treasure itself is like the Book of Light or whatever. It's a total MacGuffin thing, but it's like it's the thing that allows the kingdom to remain in peace. Blah blah blah. That stuff.
Right.
And that's why, of course, the goddess of chaos wants it. So, but just when it seems like uh, maybe Phoebus, not Phoebus, Proteus. I think that's it. Anyway, I'm suddenly blanking on it. But this other guy who is the prince of this kingdom, and Sinbad's old best friend, just when it seems like he's going to talk Sinbad out of it, the Eris, the goddess of chaos, sends a monster, and it looks like Sinbad's going to drown, and she gives him a devil's bargain of like, you're going to get this book for me, and I will help you live again, and then you'll get all the reward and the treasure. get to retire in glory. You're making facial expressions.
My dogs just busted into my office.
Oh.
How did you guys get in? The door's shut. Get out of here. Get. Go. Go.
Well, so in any case, the so it is seems like Sinbad is drowned and the rest of the ship kind of goes on, but then Sinbad reunites with his pirates, says we're going to go in and steal this thing again. Okay, well, I'm kind of just doing all the plot beats. It turns out that he decides not to steal the book, but Eris frames him for it anyway, and he's going to be executed. But this prince basically says, I believe that if anyone can, I not only do I believe you that Eris is framing you, but I think you're the only one who could get it back from her. And so I am going to volunteer to take your place in prison, including execution in 10 days, unless you can go and get and bring the book back. And then complicating the matter is the prince's betrothed is played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, who says she's going to come along to make sure he does it, but also she kind of starts falling for him because, of course, it's love triangle, all that stuff. But then we get just a lot of big adventure things, sailing through shipwrecks and fighting monsters. And, there's a section where, they had been really skeptical of having a woman on board, but then they have to deal with sirens. And so she's the only one that can actually keep the ship going when everyone else is lovesick from the siren song. And all of that sort of mythological stuff. And there's a lot of fun in there, although it's interesting just because for being a story about Sinbad, it seems like they're really drawing in a lot of like Greek mythology too, which I'm not sure is where Sinbad's origin is. I guess I'm not really sure about all of the Sinbad history, but it doesn't matter. So the point is, it's a fairly straightforward adventure movie. It's got some fun quips. It's got some good voice acting. It's I think my favorite thing about it, though, honestly, is just like the visuals and the action sequences are a lot of fun.
So Sinbad is an Arabic story.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. And so it feels like they are sort of transplanting him to more like they're wanting to have him be Perseus or something. You know what I mean?
Or Odysseus. I mean, that was the
Yeah.
siren. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, but it, like in any event though, it's that mode of adventure, and there's some good, supporting characters in the other pirates, and lots of fun stuff with Michelle Pfeiffer playing the Eris, the goddess of chaos, and the way she moves around. And like, there's a bit where she's framing him, where what she does, like she appears out of shadow, and she always looks a little bit like she's bleeding out of her own animation lines and that sort of thing, which is fun. But then when she goes to frame him, she sort of conjures out of shadow what looks like a skin suit of Sinbad, which then she proceeds to put on like she's putting on a garment of clothing, to look like him, so that he'll be framed for the theft. And it's just like there's a lot of fun stuff in the animation with that. And like Spirit, I think this is a movie that if you've never seen it or if you haven't in a while, I think it's fun to check out. It's not one of the all-time masterpieces, but it's entertaining.
Yeah. Kind of after hearing you talk about it, I think that's one that I may still put on a list to go and see, even if it didn't wasn't for this particular discussion. So.
Well, I'll confess that I had forgot it even existed for years and years.
I kind of did too, and that's part of what was hard on those two. Like, and the same with Spirit. Like, I mean, they're fine. They were fine when I saw them, but they were immemorable. So.
I think I literally saw Sinbad and Pirates of the Caribbean on the same day, like as a double feature. Sinbad first, and it was like, yeah, that was pretty good. And then Pirates of the Caribbean, which is, of course, once you've seen that one, that's all you want to talk about. When it was
Yep.
new, anyway. It, of course, has been extended, perhaps its most potent years. But in any case, now that we've kind of touched on Spirit and Sinbad, let's talk about the two that are the most worthy of visiting if people haven't seen them, and very much I very much enjoyed my rewatch of them. Um,
Yes, me.
so let's go ahead and start with Prince of Egypt. So it is it is the story of Moses. It is done as a musical, although by and large most the songs are kind of half and half. Okay, never mind. I guess some of the songs play out the way a traditional musical would, where the characters kind of break into song, and some of the songs are kind of almost more like montages being sung, by no one in particular, like no one on screen as singing in character.
Yep.
But it's a musical story telling the story of Moses, who grows up as an Egyptian prince, thus the title, but then discovers his true heritage. Um, receives his mission from the burning bush, and then goes to try to have the Pharaoh let his people go, and so on. And then the seven plagues, etc., parting the Red Sea. I mean, people probably know that story, but so that's the story being told here, but as a musical. And although there is periodic comic relief, it is really not a comedy in any way.
No.
It's there's little bits here and there. For example, you have Martin Short and Steve Martin playing two of the Pharaoh's magician advisors, which honestly, although I love Steve Martin and Martin Short, they really stand out now as like I okay. When I say stand out, I should be clear. I mean they stick out. Like they don't feel like they belong with the rest of the movie.
Yes. Yeah, I felt the same way because I mean it's a very much a. Yeah, I think the intention of it was to do an animated version of the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, stay very true to the story. Um, it even I don't remember if it always had this, but in the version that I had, it had like a disclaimer at the front about how like this is taken from Deuteronomy,
Yeah.
Exodus,
I
so on and
think
so
that
forth in
was
the
always
Bible.
part of it. I think that was
Yeah.
always there.
And it's intended to reflect it, but it's not a perfect adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's meant to just I think it said something like embody the theme that this brings to the millions of believers worldwide or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
something on there that kind of went it kind of went both ways. It was kind of the hey, if you are a believer, it's going to be a musical, but it's still meant to be true.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're not, it's still a good story, and we're telling it, so on and so forth. Like it had
Yeah.
this like kind of like
Yeah.
I actually felt it was pretty good. Like I don't need to dismiss it. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was actually really good of like making it broader.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could have
Yeah,
been.
it kind of threads the needle there of basically saying this is a story that means a lot to a lot of people of various traditions. Where it comes from this source, we're not following that exactly. We've taken some dramatic license, but we have tried to respect the spirit of the story. Yeah, so and I think it's a good statement, and it's good that they made it. Just because otherwise, you could potentially get people primed to be offended. Although I think in when this came out, my perception was that it was not seen as offensive, but rather that like religious communities really liked that a big mainstream animated movie was being made of a biblical story. So
Yeah, and that's why I was curious about whether the statement was modern or
oh yeah, I think it was always part of the movie.
yeah,
Um,
because it would make sense why they would put it on there now, where like you said, like there's more of a like a better like people finding things
sensitivity.
to be offended by. Yeah, like
Yeah.
as opposed to and like I said, it threads the needle both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So
Um,
And then obviously this is a story that, you know, you're blending faiths, and
mhm,
you know, you're it's a very, I mean, it's a story from the Old Testament Jewish part of the Bible, but
mhm,
also one that Christians really believe. So you're trying to
yeah,
balance different faiths and their view on
yeah,
this, plus people who don't believe it. Like, and and I think that's what impressed me the most about it, playing it straight. Which again, I know this movie was made 25 years ago,
mhm,
but the idea that it didn't, it put that statement out, but then it didn't hedge after that, right? Like it was other than, which is why like the silliness part kind of stood out, because the rest of
mhm,
it was very serious, like very
yeah.
much like, you know,
Well, I do,
playing it straight, you
yeah,
know.
I do kind of like that as the story develops, even the silly parts get less silly, right? The arc of like those two characters, those they're the Pharaoh's magicians, and this is part of the actual biblical story. Of course, is that when Moses first shows up and he does a miracle to turn his staff into a snake to show I've been given power by God to persuade you, but they have all of their own little tricks that they do. And although some of them are like we would very reasonably say like how did they do that? It's definitely portrayed in the story as like no, they're tricks. What they're doing is tricks.
Yeah.
Even though they're very impressive tricks and to people who don't necessarily have the experience that Moses did, it could be perceived as, well, you're both doing tricks. So what's the difference? Right? And so they get their whole song. You're playing with the big boys now. That song, which I don't know. I like again. I like them, but they're probably the worst part of the movie. But then, of course, as things develop, and Moses is doing more miracles, like when he turns the water in the river to blood, they're kind of like, yeah, sure, we can do that too. And they basically put some red powder in some water and make it look kind of red. And it's like, see, it's the same. But then, of course, later during the seven plagues, we see that they're suffering from the seven plagues too, and Pharaoh chases them away because they're utterly failing at that point. So I kind of like that the where that goes, it kind of gives up the comic relief element of it.
It almost uses it to like reinforce the, you know, the actual like message, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh well, at first it seems kind of like a trick, but
Mm-hmm.
as he gets deeper and deeper, the trick part sort of goes away, and
Mm-hmm.
these guys are sort of representative of that, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I do like, even though I was kind of, dismissing the playing with the big boys now song a little bit. There's some cool stuff in it, but one of the nice details is that there's a bit where like they have also sort of conjured snakes to show that they can do the same thing, but then there's a little bit that we see only in shadow silhouette where no one else is watching, is that Moses's snake eats their snakes
Yes,
to
I love
kind
that
of
part.
yeah to kind of convey that that's not real power. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that while there are some like instances of that, and I think that that might have been kind of a concession to people who were just worried that like are people going to want to watch it if there's like nothing silly or funny in it. It's a cartoon, they're not used to cartoons being serious in that way, and so they felt like they had to throw in a little bit of that stuff. We've seen that, like you see that in some of Disney's movies, like Hunchback of Notre Dame's kind of notorious for it, of like, well, the story is too serious and dark, so let's add some crazy wisecracking gargoyles, that stuff. But by and large, that's a relatively small part of the movie, and the rest of it is very serious. And it really does portray with a fascinating nuance Moses's relationship with, Ramses, his adopted brother, that he doesn't know is he that he's adopted until he's an adult. And so the two of them, their relationship with one another, Moses grows up as believing he's the younger son, so therefore he's not going to inherit. There's a little bit of a dynamic there, but he doesn't want it. So he gets to be the one where when the father is really hard on Ramesses because he's, screwing up, Moses is the one who's like, come on, go easy on him. He's trying so hard, that sort of thing. And then they have this like real relationship, and the movie does not try to just have Ramesses be the bad guy all the way through.
No, I think you hit on exactly what I was going to get into, is that the most interesting part of this movie that differs it from other tellings of the story is the character of Ramses.
Mm-hmm.
Because you get to see him as a real person who has real relationships and things like that. You get to see how he got to the point where like ultimate power like ultimately corrupted him, and like why like the slave like he wasn't just like the guy who thought slaves should be doing stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he sort of got to that place of like, well, yeah, slaves need to be doing this, but you see how you could get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then also he's not doing it to Moses because he hates Jews or hates God or hates any of this. Like it's so much of it is born out of his own insecurity with his relationship with his own brother and
Mm-hmm.
father, that it gives this like realism to something that we have only seen sort of shorthanded.
Yeah. Well, and like there's character nuance there, right? And I think other movie versions have dealt with that some too. But I also like by the same token, before Moses kind of learns the truth about himself, we see that first of all, he doesn't particularly care about slaves. Slaves are just a fact of life as far as he is concerned. It's like, yeah, you see them, they're working on the thing. I mean, how else are you going to build a big statue? Like that. I mean, that's where he's at. Rocket is moving his head against the base of my stand and shifting my microphone away. But so he's and in fact, there's a bit where at this big dinner that happens kind of suddenly after they've been they got in trouble, and part of the reason we learn that it was inconvenient that they got in trouble for breaking one of the big statues was that the father had actually planned to give Ramesses a big sort of like amount of responsibility in a big celebratory dinner, and it's kind of like breaking one of the statues the morning the morning before I do that is not the look I was hoping for. But then of course there's this dinner, and there's a woman who has been captured from one of the nomadic tribes and is presented as a gift to Ramesses, who, because Ramesses and Moses are joking about it, says, well, I give her to you. And then he's initially kind of playing at it like he thinks it's funny too. And there's actually a moment where it's his mom that basically like gives him a disappointed look because he's not respecting women, where he kind of gives everything a second look, and he realizes like, oh yeah, this is actually like, I do actually feel bad about this. And then of course that's what leads to, all the further discoveries, because she's taken up to his room, but then when he goes up planning to let her go, it turns out she's already in the process of escaping. That's kind of a fun bit. There's a little bit of silliness there where he sees the silhouette he thinks is her, and it turns out it's actually the servant tied up. But then when he helps her escape, and then he's trying to follow her, is when he meets his real sister and brother, right? And she kind of spills the beans because she assumes, why would you be here if you didn't know already? And so she tells him, and he doesn't believe it, and then, that leads to the whole thing. So, but I just like the nuance of he's just not this good guy who always saw everything that was wrong. He really kind of had to have it be made personal to him before he saw it as well.
Yep.
And that's some interesting nuance. What? Oh, one thing I meant to mention earlier. Uh, this is not necessarily a criticism of the movie now, but we were talking a little bit about like the way we're a little more sensitive to some things now than we were 25 years ago. Probably if you were making this movie today, you don't cast an entirely white uh, cast of voice actors to play all of these Egyptian and Jewish characters.
Yeah. And I was actually I was holding that comment back to also to the Road to El Dorado,
Mm,
where we cast two white people to, you know, and homogenize Americans to play Spaniards and
yeah. At least there
indigenous
you
and
have
all
like
that.
Edward James Olmos as the chief. At least where it's a little closer. Rosie Perez, right? But still, it's half measures in
Yes,
some ways.
but agreed.
Yeah.
But all that being said, I think what we should dive into to close this movie out, unless there's like others here. I mean, this plot. I mean, it's a 3,000, 4,000 year old
Mm-hmm.
plot. Is the what I really loved about this movie visually, because we're here to talk about the animation,
Mm-hmm.
was the blending of the 2D animation with the CG.
Mm-hmm.
This movie I think does this. I mean, Road to El Dorado does it in certain scenes.
Yeah,
Particularly,
it's very
but
stylized in those bits.
yeah, but this one like uses it to enhance the story. I
Mm.
mean, there's probably places I didn't see it, but like there were places where it was stunning, like the parting of the Red Sea,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that he comes up in 2D animation, and then you can tell it's definitely like, but it's not. It's only because we're looking for it because we're doing this particular
Mm-hmm.
episode. The way the water parts, and that you can see the animals and the creatures like still swimming, to see they're still active seas even though they're up
Mm-hmm.
in these walls, like that stuff is powerful,
Yeah.
right? Like the way they used it to, the famous, obviously the famous part when God speaks to Moses through the burning bush, and
Mm-hmm.
the way they took the 2D animation but then made the burning bush like the CG, like kind
Mm-hmm.
of larger than life, like the way it melded that stuff, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
is visually stunning.
Yeah, 100%. I agree completely. They also use the CG stuff a lot on just when they're moving through the buildings really fast. Like the buildings are rendered in CG as the 2D characters sort of move through them. There's bits like when they break the nose off the statue and the nose is kind of crashing down after them breaking through the scaffolding. Like that part, the nose part is rendered in 3D, so they don't have to keep drawing a specific nose shape uh, moving around so much like that. Because of course there are some things that are just easier to do in CG if it can look good. So yeah, there's that like that's great. And I for all the idea that it would perhaps be better to um, uh, not cast all white actors as the cast. I mean, they certainly do a good job. We got Val Kilmer as Moses, Rafe Fiennes as Ramesses, Sandra Bullock, and Jeff Goldblum as Moses's brother and sister. Um, let's see who else. Patrick Stewart is the Ramesses' father. Oh, you do have Danny Glover as Moses's wife's dad, who gets a good song. That's one of the better songs, I think.
We
The
also, I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer is in this too,
Oh
which
yeah, yeah. Well, as the woman that is sort of gifted to Moses, and then he helps escape. Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, like, it's a good cast. It's just that you would probably approach casting differently today. Um, and so I don't know. Just maybe before we move away from it, I think that there are several songs in it that I think are great, but I think looking back, it's certainly the Seven Plagues sequence that feels like That's that's the sequence. You know what I mean? Like if you were going to pick a highlight reel, yeah, like that's the one.
That's, I mean, because looking back at it, like before I rewatched it, like that was the most memorable sequence to me.
Hmm.
That was like what I was kind of waiting for.
Yeah, yeah.
Was the Seven Plagues sequence. I had forgotten about. I didn't feel as. I mean, I thought the big boy you're playing with the big boys now thing was kind of funny because
Hmm.
it like, especially because I know how obviously I know how it's going to end, right? Like
Mm,
they're going to be
yeah,
disproven. So to set up that foil, like it was fun enough,
yeah,
like
yeah.
to like try so hard. Um, but yeah, I had forgotten about that. I mean, I had forgotten about again one of the things that I'm left with right now. I feel like the Red Sea crossing scene was one
Mm,
of the most visually well done.
yeah. It's really awe-inspiring in a way that like just the concept of parting the Red Sea is something that's been so in the culture for so long that it's been riffed on and parodied so many times, like to a degree far beyond anything that we talk about happening in movies where some movie comes out and it's influential but then it gets iterated on and it loses its impact. But like the idea of parting the Red Sea, it's always of course like it would be miraculous to see it happen, of course, but you don't necessarily always imagine a mental picture as awe inspiring as it is portrayed here in a way that it just like it you can imagine like it would you can imagine being there and thinking like there's no question that this is a miraculous thing that's happening and and
Right.
and and one of the things that this movie really does, which is an important part of that story, I'm not going to, we don't have to get into the actual like religious philosophy of it and all that, but for all that we can say, the Hebrews are God's chosen people and He's helping them and all of that. His miracles are freaking scary. Like even when they are helping you and hurting someone else, they are scary. Like, I mean, he turned the river into blood. He made locusts and frogs and fire rain from the sky. And then, of course, if like the big curse, like the death of all the firstborn. I mean, that is portrayed in such a I don't know, tasteful. Is that the right word? Way where like
I know what you're saying.
it
Yeah.
recognizes how horrifying it is, but portrays it in kind of the most gentle way that you can without losing the fact of how horrifying it is. And in fact, I really think it is crucial that the movie gives us Moses reacting to it as like he's extremely upset and devastated by this happening. And to some extent even it's not that he's questioning his faith so much as like why did it have to come to this, but even still it's awful and it's scary and it's portrayed that way. And so like when we're seeing the pillar of fire and the parting of the Red Sea, especially like when it comes, when it's going to be unparted to take out the army, like it's like it feels not just awe-inspiring but scary, and I think that's really neat.
Yes. No, I mean I agree. I think that it over delivers on all of that stuff because those are, which is part of the reason why it was like nice to bring the story into an animated is that
Hmm.
like, yeah, you can go back and watch Charlton Heston and like all that stuff in the 60s and the 10 Commandments and
Hmm.
it does all this stuff, but it looks so dated that you're just like, oh yeah, that's like it feels dated, like the story feels like
Hmm.
it's a story from a long time ago. Like this makes it so contemporaneously like relevant.
Yeah.
You're like, God, yeah, that would be pretty fucking scary if that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would believe in the power of God if that
Yeah.
like those things started happening to you.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the Charlton Heston one because I think that is one of the powers of animation when it's done well is that I think Prince of Egypt is now 25 years old, but I feel like it's timeless in a way that the Ten Commandments Charlton Heston movie is not. Because you can still enjoy it as a good movie and enjoy it if the story is meaningful to you, but the movie as a film has shown its age, and it is very of its time in terms of the filmmaking.
Yes. Hmm.
Yep. All right, so I think with that, let's move on to Road to El Dorado, which is I don't know, one of my favorite animated movies, and I know that it's one that you and I have enjoyed quoting from endlessly over the years. Um, Full of so many different little memorable lines. And I feel like even though the movie for a long time was underwatched and underrated, I feel like over the last 20 years the consensus has come around on it a little bit. Like some of its best moments have become fairly recognizable mainstream gifs and that sort of thing. Um, I feel like there's been a bit of a reevaluation of it where people realize, yes, it's actually great.
Exactly. And yes, and as you said, it's one of my favorite movies. And
Mm,
it's it's much less serious
yeah,
um
I
than
right. I mean, even the title is evoking the series of movies that were done with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, right? Whereas like the Road to, they had a whole bunch of the Road to movies where it's basically those two guys just doing buddy comedy stuff in a variety of places. Um,
exactly.
yeah, let's see. The Road to Singapore, The Road to Zanzibar, The Road to Morocco, The Road to Utopia, The Road to Rio. There was a whole series of those. And
Yeah.
so, like, the title is very much evoking that, right?
Right. It's
You know,
evoking the buddy comedy, like,
mm-hmm,
yeah,
yeah. And I love to, like, more to love in this movie is just that it's still safe and deniable in the way that a lot of animation of that time period is, but it's got some queerness in there, if only in subtext. But that's kind of fun to look back on too. Get all the memes of like, this is what happens when the rogue and the bard go on an adventure together without the rest of the party. So many just different little memes. This has got some fun songs too, although even more so than in Prince of Egypt, mostly the songs are not being sung by the characters on screen. I think there's really, it's Good to Be a God is really the only one, right?
Trail We Blaze.
I guess, but even then, like, so that is the characters singing in character on the track, but what we're watching on screen during the song is not them singing, though.
Oh, yeah, fair. Yeah. Okay,
Hmm.
got it.
But I mean, it's a good distinction because a lot of the songs are just Elton John singing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this movie, like, it has some character drama, but it's mostly just the comedy about Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline doing bits with each other, and then Rosie Perez shows up and she adds new bits that they can do between the three of them, and then you get some action and some excitement, but mostly it's about bits, and there's so many good ones.
Right, exactly. And that's where like I was gonna say, like, we'll flip the script on this one and discuss like the influence of the CG combined with the 2D.
Hmm.
Let's just get that out of the way. Like there's the part where the guy becomes the jaguar, right? And he's
Yeah, yeah.
chasing through. Like, yeah, that's a blend of 2D and CG, and it's cool and whatever, but like this movie is not that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Prince of Egypt was very much like, let's use this to tell this story in a
Mm-hmm.
visually stunning way.
Right.
This movie is, let's use that like to just kind of get through some of the parts that we have to get through,
Mm-hmm.
but let's just really just have like this banter between
Yeah.
all these different characters. And I mean every character involved has a bit or a quip or whatever. And they're not, and I think that was the thing rewatching it. They feel less, I don't know, like they just, it wasn't the same as like you were talking about, like the Marvel movie quips and the
Mm-hmm.
Sinbad quips. Like, I don't know, these just felt more clever.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It's hard to put your finger on what the actual difference is. But yeah, all the Marvel Cinematic Universe quips, which have kind of become like a new standard that a lot of other things imitate now because it seems to do so well in the MCU movies, and I'm not criticizing those, and there's a variety of them as well. But it does feel a little bit like it's become the house standard, and it has the rough edges filed off of it a little bit. And whereas this movie, even though obviously this is an animated film, so the animation process takes a long time, but it feels a lot looser. Um, Everyone's talking really fast in a way that they usually don't in Marvel movies. Um, they don't. They don't wait for big moments to get a one-liner in.
Right. Well, and I think the other thing that I would say, like I was thinking about this, is that it, I don't think how to say this, right? Like it feels more like transitional than just the moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the one I always think of, like the one that me and my sister quote to each other all the time, and I think you and I probably also do the same one, where it's just like, he gave me loaded
I know.
dice. Like to try to explain why that's funny
Yeah.
is so
Well,
complicated,
so like that's
and it needs so many more things.
yeah. But right, well, I so or maybe organic is the word then. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a joke layered onto a situation. It feels like they're actually talking about the real things that are happening to them. And that they're really thinking of these things in the moment, as opposed to it feeling almost like a separate layer of the story. It feels inherent to who these two guys are. Um, and especially and like and they're not the same as each other either, right? Like they each have their own kind of like sometimes they have some team bits that they do, but uh but they do feel distinct even in their joking. But I remember one of the things that you said when we were talking about doing this episode is that your wife hadn't seen it and you were excited to show it to her. Did she watch it with you?
No,
Oh
I'm trying
well.
to get her to do it. She
Oh well.
dead set on watching Suits every time we watch something. But
Well,
with
not every movie is for everybody anyway. But it's like it's. But yeah, this there's so many bits in this movie. Like the one that often I think of the most out of context is the that's right, stars can't do it, not today.
not today.
The stars. So if people haven't seen it, that they have shown up at El Dorado. They've been mistaken for gods. I say mistaken in finger quotes because there's kind of a little more going on there. But
You're definitely allowing the mistake.
yeah,
Yeah.
but there's a few. There's basically the one guy is going to offer a human sacrifice to the gods, and they're suddenly going like, oh, um, no, we don't want that. But at the same time, they're trying to figure out how to get out of it. So then it's fine. It's like, no, the problem is, tell him. And then it's like, well, the stars are not in position for this sacrifice. And
Doesn't
he
Rosie Perez's character like feed them that information? It's like you
not that
this.
one.
Okay.
She helps him with some other bits, but not this particular one where. Uh, but what's great about it is that he says the stars are not in position for this alignment, and he just lets it hang there because he's just daring the priest to tell him he's wrong. But it's just he's just call my bluff, that whole thing, you know. But then of course the backup is, you know, that's right, stars can't do it, not today. Um, but of course, and then you know they get that big victory where, you know, like, you know, no more human sacrifice, and all the people who don't like human sacrifice cheer, and the priest is embarrassed, and then the chief comes out with all the gold, and it's this big sort of triumphant moment, and then there's a tu shivalva, and they're like, sure, tu shivalva, and that's when Rosie Perez is like, no,
That
because
means to the spirit world.
to the spirit world. They're going to throw it all into the whirlpool. Yeah, so great stuff. So like we kind of covered, you know, the basics of the plot. If anyone who hasn't seen this, is basically like the plot is these two con artists from Spain accidentally end up on Cortez's ship, of all people. Shows up into the New World. They follow a treasure map, reach the city of El Dorado, mistaken as gods, hang out for a while, playing the chief with off the high priest, where the chief basically likes things to be peaceful and nice and fun, and the high priest wants a mass purge of all the undeserving. So we know who we like and who we don't, and they gradually start feeling some conflict between one of them wanting to kind of have more adventure and stay and not leave, and the other one is like, no, we're going to get the gold and leave and go back to Spain, and the tension there. But eventually there's conflict with the high priest, and then the high priest is going to bring Cortez back, but they save the day by sacrificing the ability to stay and all of the gold that they were saving in order to protect the town from Cortez, and everybody wins. Yay. And Rosie Perez comes with them. She's a girl from El Dorado who wants to get out in the same way that they want to get in, and so she becomes the new, you know, the third to their little outfit. So that's the basic plot. But as mentioned, it's really all just scaffolding to hold all the jokes on.
Yes.
And, you know, because we've also got a nice cartoon horse who gets to do lots of fun stuff. He gets to be the smartest character of the three, even though he can't talk, that sort of thing. And then you get a little cartoon armadillo who's mostly there to just be, you know, for little kids, but then at the same time helps them win this ridiculous sport that they do. And there's just so much fun stuff. Like the songs are, you know, nothing special, but they move the story along. They convey some of the more nuanced bits, like, because they set up incredibly before they arrive on the island. They have escaped Cortez's ship, but now they're in a rowboat way out to sea. They think they're going to die, and so they're talking to each other. What's your greatest regret besides dying? And one of them is saying, I never had enough gold. And the other is saying, well, I'm sad that because our biggest adventure is just ending before it can begin. And then the way that develops, I won't just do the whole scene, but like they make that scene really funny. But it establishes early on that both of them have kind of this stated desire for what they want. And then when those things come into conflict later, they discover that these two guys that have been peas in a pod, best of friends, and maybe more, question mark, like it's never explicit in the movie, but it's also like I think there's some coding in there.
There is, but it's very like early 2000s coding.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah.
the Rosie Perez thing into it, to like kind
Mm-hmm.
of like say, oh, if you were worried about this coding, like this isn't here because
Yeah. Well, we could
he and
certainly
him like each
imagine.
other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, but we could also certainly imagine that he's bi, or like you know what I mean. Like, so the two characters are Miguel and Tulio, and together they call us Miguel and Tulio. But yeah, so there's lots of fun stuff with the three of them. They all really have sort of great, voice acting chemistry with each other. Just the rhythms of all the dialogue and all the stuff they do, and the animation was just great. It's like I don't know. I love this movie, but to some extent, it's hard to talk that much more about it without just doing all the jokes at people. Um,
Yeah.
but
No, I agree. I think that's the crux of the movie is like
mm,
it's a bunch of funny jokes that
yeah.
like we already talked about, like the whatever it is, the depth or the organicness or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that a joke about, them getting caught gambling in Spain, which is what sends them on this journey,
Mm-hmm.
because they're using loaded dice, and the whole play off of each other of like the guy finding out that they had loaded dice
Mm-hmm.
and saying these are loaded dice, and then looking at each other, and he says, loaded dice? And he says, he gave me loaded dice. Like
Yeah.
that line means nothing, but it's so like it's the whole like impetus to them pretending to fight each other to
Yeah.
get themselves out of the situation, and how that like translates to like a line that we can use with each other now, like
Well, the
it's weird,
well, the other thing that it does, which is so deft in the screenplay, is it's so funny in the moment and it's fun not just in a jokey sense but also just this camaraderie sense of these two guys have all of these routines that they do,
yeah.
where they pretend to sword fight and they have insult banter and everything, that is just so spectacular that it distracts everybody and they can get away, right? But then that all sets up later when they've been starting to have some conflict with one another, but now they're both having to deal with Jekyll Khan, the high priest, and so they start going into the play fight thing to do that routine. But the problem is, because of the tensions between them, their little banter insults kind of really hurt now and really
Yes.
sting. And there's this pretend fight is starting to be a real fight. And it hurts. And even though it ultimately succeeds and they win that sort of immediate battle, they're left with hurt feelings at the end, at the end of it. And so like that's when it seems like they're going to actually separate, and Miguel is going to go off um, with the gold, and Julia is going to stay, right? And or am I saying it? I feel like I'm forgetting which one is which.
No, Miguel wants to leave.
Yes, right. Okay, I had it right.
He's the one with the pseudo relationship with
Yeah,
the Rosa
with
Perez
yeah,
character,
Chell.
and Julio wants to stay,
Right. Yeah.
and
No,
the Rosa Perez character wants to leave
I
too.
was just
Yeah.
yeah, I was just like the names of like they're so distinct visually that you never are confused which one is which. But like I was forgetting which name goes with which. But in any case, but yeah, so many of those things that are just jokey jokes early on end up being more meaningful later. And it's just fun. This movie is a lot of fun, and but then you get those moments where like it's never too heavy, but when the two guys are really kind of not even really speaking to each other and they're being really passive aggressive with each other and it seems like they're actually going to separate, and like you feel that because it's been so fun with the two of them for the whole movie that it feels wrong when they're fighting. But then that leads to moments where the reveal that the chief actually knows they're not really gods and just kind of gives him sort of like he's talking. He's basically saying, "Oh no, we're gonna have to redo the whole boat because here I'm gonna try to figure out something wrong with this boat, even though I don't know anything about boats. Um, well, not enough rope. Nope, not enough rope. Gonna have to make the boat again because there's not enough rope. But then he kind of says, you know what? Never mind. My mistake. And the chief's just like, well, to err is human. It's just
That's
really kind
that
of.
is a really funny. That's a funny and poignant line.
Yeah, and especially because what the chief had just been telling him is like, maybe you ought to make up with your best friend before you never see each other again. But also just this reveal that like, I'm the one that's been nice to you this whole time, but also I know that you're not really a god. I was just kind of, in a way, I'm kind of using you as much as you are using us, because I'm trying to use you to get rid of the influence of this high priest guy who's just wants to do human sacrifices and stuff. But at this recognition of like, but no, but I actually do like you. I'm trying to give you good advice here, and you know what? I'm not going to blow up your spot because we're kind of all in on this here. It is a lie agreed upon, not a scam anymore. Yeah, and so like that feels like meaningful in a character sense, even though mostly the movie is kind of silly. And then of course it's scary when the jaguar is rampaging around, and Cortez is certainly scary, even though he doesn't actually do anything in the movie. We just have to know he's a scary guy.
They do a good job with that.
Yeah, he is certainly portrayed as scary, and of course, if you know anything about real history, yeah, Cortez was a scary guy. But he mostly shows up and is scary without actually doing anything. It's just he's all attitude. But thankfully, we are certainly definitely on the side of don't let Cortez find El Dorado. That would be bad. But yeah, it's so much fun. I just love it, and just the chemistry of these two guys, and then when Chell shows up, played by Rosie Perez, just the three of them together. There's just so many fun little bits. Again, yeah, like it's all great. It's just so fun. That's what the movie is. It's why it's great.
It's a fun hour and a half. It's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yep. All right. So I'm just realizing now that although for many episodes in a row we planned in advance what our next one was going to be before we recorded each, we didn't really do that this time. But this was my suggestion. Do you have one in the chamber?
I do.
Oh,
So it's actually it's fitting to what we just discussed here, but there was a book that just came out a month or two ago called The Last Action Heroes,
okay.
and it's about the transition in cinema from like the action hero being the center of the action story to more of the spectacle coming from CG computer graphics.
Okay.
So it's very tied into like the 80s and the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme,
Mm-hmm.
and how Jurassic Park essentially like killed that idea
Hmm.
of what they were doing. Because from the Stallone Schwarzenegger perspective, it was like the spectacle needed to be a person who is bigger and more imposing than any regular person.
Right.
That's what made it interesting. From the Seagal Van Damme, it was they can do all these really cool things. And then once you got to Jurassic Park, it was like, oh well, now dinosaurs, T Rex, this,
Mm-hmm.
and the spectacle became what can you do with the computer as opposed to what can you do with an actual person, and it killed like that part of the action hero.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
so I thought it might be fun, whether it's this one or not, to pick like one or two of like of those four, you know, 80s action heroes, what are like their two kind of best movies? You know, so is it like Terminator and Commando? You know, Bloodsport and whatever. You
Mm-hmm.
know, not Rocky, because Rocky's not an action hero.
Rambo.
Rambo, yeah, Rambo and something
You
else.
know,
Yeah.
I've never seen Rambo.
Well, that makes a case for us doing two because Rambo and Rambo 2 are so different.
Right, because it's one. Rambo 2 is First Blood, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Rambo is actually played like a very actually pretty straightforward
Mm-hmm.
redemption Vietnam vet coming forward. Rambo 2 First Blood is like, oh, now we're making this into like an 80s action movie
Yeah.
where like this guy is this,
I
right?
haven't seen either of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I am definitely open to this conceptually. I'm just calling out that I hadn't seen those, but if whichever ones you want to lead us towards is that will support the theme works for me.
Yeah, the only problem is if you do two per person based on like I'm just basing it on the book. The book is focused on
Well, it sounds like Rambo 2 is the one that's kind of the representative of this style that you're talking about.
yes. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Um Rambo 2.
So like we
So
could Rambo 2 and like we could do Commando because like Terminator is great, but it's less what you're talking about, I think. Right?
yeah, Commando's much more what I'm talking about.
Or for that matter, Predator.
Or Predator. Yeah. Yeah. I would rather honestly rather do Predator.
I would rather watch Predator than Commando.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, Commando's fine, but it's like it's we were talking about jokey jokes and one-liners and
yeah,
stuff. Commandos.
Commando's almost like too far down the like this is the stew of what exists at this point, and this is just a movie that's in it,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
You know, Predator is like a defining one that has had resonance.
Yeah.
So with Predator, Rambo 2,
Um
Seagal movie, those are tough. I mean, there's some um and Van Damme too. Um
Is Seagal really in the same class as those though? I mean, I feel like he did fewer movies that were that big.
so his earlier ones were, and that's where the what the book is kind of pointing out is it's drawing the it's not just the big muscle thing. It's also this like you can do
Well,
something different thing, right? So it's
let
like there's a combo to it.
there let me offer and I don't maybe your book doesn't get into this element of it, but in what you're describing, it also makes me think of like martial arts movies like Jackie Chan or Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee, and something like that. Like that's kind of feels like along the same line, or is that too different? You think for the theme you're talking about?
It's too different because what it's trying to take is sort of that inference of what a good action movie does
Mm-hmm.
of everyday person
Mm-hmm.
and how they could like just sort of transitioning them just a little bit into this action thing,
Okay.
which is what Jurassic Park does, right? Like it takes us and it says like, hey, we could end up in a situation where, you know, whatever we're like, not I guess it's not realistic, but it's like there's just enough transitional
Mm-hmm.
where you could say, oh, I could see myself if I had gone down the path of being you know, studying that I could have ended up there, and then I would have been stuck with this T-Rex. Or hey,
Okay.
if I studied martial arts, I could get that good at it. Or if I lifted enough weights, I could get good at that.
I see. I like. I'm not sure. I agree. In turn, I'm not saying that we should definitely do those, but I feel like if I'm watching Jackie Chan in a movie, there is no part of my brain that thinks that I could have ever done that.
Correct. That's why I'm saying Jackie Chan is not part of this.
Well, but Predator is though.
No, not Predator in and of itself. You being the character that ended up like you
I okay.
had.
I feel like I'm not following the theme then maybe, because
Okay.
I thought the idea was the action hero as the larger than life guy who can do it all because he's so tough. He's not an everyman, he is a badass.
But yet he's supposed to be transitional, like unrealistically transitional, but like where you can see how you could be that guy. Like you could see you could be the guy in the army who got sent to the place where Predator existed. That's what the idea is. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
I mean, I guess, but that it makes less sense than what I thought you were saying.
I understand that.
I
I
mean,
think I
I
was
haven't read the book, so
yeah.
but I perhaps in watching the movies that you think best fit the theme, I will better understand what you're getting at.
Well, and again, it's a book, so they picked certain things, but they chose four people in particular, two who were larger than life muscularly, and
Mm-hmm.
two who were larger than life, you know, whatever you want to call it, athletically, not really,
Okay.
but martial arts wise. But yet they were all someone who you could aspirationally maybe be like.
I'm just
So it's not the movies, it's the star
I'm just
that is
saying
the book is
how
connecting to.
if Jean Claude Van Damme is fits, how does Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee not fit?
Because I think they're saying that those are to your point, too far out of the aspirational. Like it doesn't actually talk about them, but it's
Okay. Well, I guess I just don't feel that way at all about Jean Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal. They do not feel like I could be that. It feels like they are the guys that are already so much better at this that they are the bigger, larger than life.
so that's interesting. Which to because to me, like as a kid in the '80s, I was like, yeah, if I did this, I did that, like I could be like Jean Claude Van Damme, you know. But I never thought I could be like Jackie Chan, right? Like he was too far. But that's me, you know. And I think the book was writing to.
I mean, I could understand if the book is focused on American cinema period, period.
We could
Um,
shorthand it like that and just make
yeah.
it just to take that
So
argument out of it, right? Yeah.
so that's fine, and I like because I'm not following the logic otherwise, but if we want to keep it, so if the idea is we want to focus on what the book's talking about and the book is focused on those guys, then that's an absolutely fine place to draw some
Yeah.
boundaries.
So we'll take 80s American action heroes
Mm-hmm.
and how that was portrayed pre, again, well, Jurassic Park sort of the easy one, but like pre where CGI kind of took over as what could where you could then put anybody into it and have a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea, the concept around it is the spectacle of what you're watching. Like the kind of I'm enthralled by this.
Mm-hmm.
And it went from the human being to the CGI. That's what the book's trying to say.
Okay.
So we can take the best 80s action spectacle movie from Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Van Damme, and Seagal. So
Okay.
we're going to go with Predator just because Terminator we've sort of separated.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
Terminator, great movie, but it's less what seems like this is talking about.
yes.
Okay. Uh,
Uh, Rambo
first,
Part Two,
first.
First Blood
Okay.
Part One, whatever the hell that
Yeah.
thing is called. Yeah.
All right. I was just looking up Steven Seagal movies. Seems like most of those were actually early '90s, but that doesn't mean we can't still. Because like Under Siege was '92, Above the Law was '88, Hard to Kill '90, Marked for Death '90. Several of those I haven't seen.
I mean, so that is actually is the funny thing is like both Hard to Kill and Marked for Death are like kind of the same movie. Above the Law, those are like all kind of the same movie. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Under Siege is his best movie,
Mm-hmm.
but if you really want like the silliness of it, you're gonna have to take Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, or Above the Law.
Well, Above the Law is the one that's in the '80s. So do we want to pick that just by virtue of our sort of where we're drawing
Yes,
lines?
yes.
Okay. Above the Law, 1988. Uh,
Well, because I think, yeah, actually now looking back, like kind of flipping through like the very brief thing, Above the Law sort of sparked Marked for Death and Hard to Kill, and
oh,
they're
it's got
simply
Pam Grier in it.
yes.
I like Pam Grier. Okay, cool. So Predator, Rambo 2, First Blood, or whatever. Above the Law, and then Van Damme. Like what? Like Bloodsport, maybe?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
That feels like the obvious one. For what we've just been talking about. There's also, let's see, I'm looking at the list. So like the Bloodsport was 88, Kickboxer 89, and then like yeah, he goes into the early 90s too because of course you got Double Impact and Hard
Yeah,
Target and
well, we got to
Lionheart.
go. Everything that we're talking about and everything those other movies are predicated on is Bloodsport.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the iconic one. Like the others are like they become a different thing.
Yeah.
Um, I just remember, I'm pretty sure it was Double Impact. I think I was watching it at your house, and just without having seen it before, there was a point where I just said 10, 9, 8, and I managed to time out when the explosion was going to happen just perfectly, and I just felt really proud of myself.
Sudden Impact, which
Oh,
is
okay.
silly enough that there's a double impact and a sudden impact, but yes. Sudden
I
Impact is one where they it's like the takeover of the NHL game.
Oh,
And
right. Okay.
and that's where the bomb is, and I'm pretty sure that's where you did it.
Uh yeah, I feel
Double
like
Impact,
it
I
was
don't think there's any explode. Man, there might be explosion with Double Impact. It
Sudden
doesn't.
Sudden Impact is Clint Eastwood movie. You
Oh,
might be thinking of Heart. There's Double
sudden death.
Impact and Sudden Death. Okay.
Sudden death. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Either way, they're
It,
all silly.
there's
It
lots of you could do any of those names or any of those words altogether. But yeah, in any case, but yeah, okay. So the plan then is Predator, Rambo, First Blood, um, uh, Above the Law, and Bloodsport.
yes.
All right, some 80s action on the menu. So, with that, thank you for listening and or watching, everybody. And in the meantime, watch good movies.
Watch good movies.